So my name is Sherry Horde. I will be facilitating today, and I'll give you a little bit of background into how we got here today. Some of you might have joined us back in November for a collaborative. We called it the Third Sector Collaborative. And what we did is we brought people from all over the third sector together to talk about where's the third sector today in Barbados and where do we want it to be. And as a result of that collaborative, there were a couple things that kept bubbling up to the surface as themes. One was to increase capacity across the third sector, and that's part of what we're doing here today. And also, in the interest of collaboration, for people to share ideas and to raise the knowledge again overall of the third sector. And we will also be doing that here today as well. And I'll share with you a few of the findings that came from the collaborative in a moment. But that's how we got to this part of the program. So Erin O'Neill is also on the call helping me today. And her and I have been working on a project throughout 2024, leading up to the second annual collaborative. And we're setting the date for that now in November. And this project, again, is meant to bring people together across the third sector to raise capacity and to raise collaboration. And we also have today with us some other people adding to this pool of knowledge. One is Mally Morgan. And we also have Darren Treasure and Laura Smith speaking as guest speakers as well. So a great cast with a lot of knowledge. And so let's get started. So again, this is going to be one of a series that we are going to have that will help people wrap their head around the third sector and how we can level up. Now, I mentioned that there was a collaborative. And at the collaborative, we did a visioning exercise and we said, what do we want the third sector in Barbados to be? And so in relation to volunteering, a couple things came up. One was a vision that there would be an actual culture of volunteerism. And in that, it would add to the economic and social contribution and that the volunteers are valued. So volunteerism being a part of the culture and not just left to a small group of people. And it was also envisioned that volunteerism would be part of people's vision for their careers. So it wouldn't be something you do part-time when you're retired or something only if you had a serious passion in something, although most people do. It would be seen as a viable career step. And people would want to come into the third sector. So that's how volunteerism gets pulled into this notion of what we want the third sector in Barbados to be. Okay, so this will be the agenda for today. We are aiming for an hour from local time, noon to 1. And we're going to talk about a few things. First, we're going to talk about identifying the need, having people really think, what is the resource gap that I have that I think a volunteer could fill? And then we call them volunteer success stories. Darren Treasure from BFIT and then Laura Smith from Bajans Helping Bajans is going to talk about their experiences and some of the successes they've had in bringing volunteers in. Then we'll talk about the ask. So how is it you would frame what you need that a volunteer could fill that need? And then Mallory is going to take over and talk about finding volunteers. Where is it you go in Barbados to fill these needs once you have identified them? This should bring us to the hour, and then we'll stay on for question and answer. Now, what I will say is as we go through this session, if you have questions about what we've talked about or what the guest speakers have talked about, throw it in the chat, or I'll have a couple gaps where I'll say, does anyone have questions? So anyone having questions about the content that's happening, please, speak up. And then on the hour, we'll stay on. And if you have questions that might be a little more specific to your specific circumstances, feel free to hang on and we can help you with those. Okay, so that is the game plan. Okay, so right now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to bring up a poll, and we're just interested to know Where do you have a resource need in your organization? It looks like some of the areas of desperate need are fundraising, membership, volunteer management. So this is topical to get you started in thinking about what is it that I need to get out there and find people to fill these gaps, and can they be a volunteer that helps us with that? So we are going to head into the area of the program where we have some people who have dealt extensively with volunteers, the challenges they had that they had to overcome in making that successful. So I want to introduce Darren Treasure. And Darren is on the board of something called BFIT, which is the Barbados Federation of Island Triathletes. It's a registered nonprofit in Barbados. And so one of the things they have to do is run a number of triathlons throughout the year. Now, in larger countries, local clubs would probably do that, and the federation would deal with the administration. But in Barbados, they do it all. And so there's a volunteer board of directors that manages everything. And so it does require a significant amount of commitment and organization.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everybody, and thank you for having me on for this discussion. Yeah, to add on to what Sherry said, I mean, as a sporting organization that kind of wears two hats, one is kind of administering and kind of promoting the sport, and then also hosting events. We need a lot of volunteers, both at the kind of the operational level in terms of running the federation, and then obviously putting on the event. So for those of you that aren't familiar with triathlon, it's three sports in one: swimming, biking, running, all happening kind of consecutively. So think about organizing three races at one time. So each part of that race requires volunteers. And then there's ancillary services to an event, for instance. So we might have an area that's dedicated to kind of athlete management in terms of before and after the race. We have to make sure the finish line is properly staffed with people, timing services. So there's a lot of things that are happening. And so, over the years, this has been a very evolving process in terms of understanding what our volunteer needs are. I mean, we've run 33 national championships of triathlon in Barbados, right? So we've had 33 times to kind of refine our process, plus other races we do of the year. So we put on probably about 12 events a year. So, through repetition, trial and error, we've kind of figured out what works best for us on an event by event basis. So, you know, we need, we've worked out that we need probably about 60 to 80 volunteers per event. Each of them have to be given a certain responsibility or duty. The way we've best organized ourselves is, we've kind of created these hierarchical structures within our events. So there's someone who takes kind of charge of the entire event, usually we call the race chair. And then working with the race chair, we have what we call chiefs, and each of those chiefs are assigned a certain set of responsibilities or area around the race that they're responsible for, and their volunteers report into them. So it's a very kind of hierarchical structure. Everybody knows who they're reporting to and who's ultimately responsible for what needs to get done. So again, in terms of, how did that come about? I mean, we, spend a lot of time kind of meticulously planning our events, and I can kind of share with you some of the tools that we use. And they're nothing really fancy. They're just a lot of Excel spreadsheets and various schedules. But again, over time, we've built these out, and they're constantly evolving. So we have kind of a planning workbook here. I'm not sure if you're seeing it on the screen. Yeah. And we meticulously kind of lay out what are the various things that needs to happen, various things that need to happen from the inception of the race, prior to the race, all the way through down to all the different organizational items. And we're trying to assign as many people to be responsible for those items as possible. So we're trying to give the people ownership and responsibility to complete those tasks. Some of them happen before the race, some of them happen after the race, during the race, and it goes on and on and on. So we've kind of, outlined 295 potential things that need to happen in the span of an event. And again, we've kind of determined between 60 and 80 volunteers can normally handle that. We are very clear about what, as a volunteer, you're expected to do, especially if you have a title. So if you're a chief, if you're, giving out finisher medals, like we try to give them some understanding of what they're going to be doing before they arrive at the event. So they come to the event and they have either done this before at previous events, or they know what they're going to do. Um, so we take that time to do that. We also, um, you know, for the key roles, we've taken the time. Let me just share another document here with you. It's almost like a job description. Like we basically have outlined the key roles that play are important to us at each event. And these are usually the people that have people reporting into them. And, we give them basically a job description. Here's what you're going to be doing at the event. And again, there's constant communication with them to understand they make sure they understand what they need to do and any challenges they may be having. So a lot of planning has gone into kind of our events and understanding what we need. Um, what we then end up doing is um, turning around and communicating with our volunteers quite frequently. So we have a volunteers briefing prior to the race, which shows who are you reporting to? Here's their email. Here's their phone number. Where are you going to show up when you arrive on race day? There's usually a volunteers area where you report and you collect either a small snack and a water because you're going to be out there possibly all day, like 4 hours in the sun. So we want to make sure that they're looked after. There's maybe a t-shirt for them to pick up so they're identifiable and people know who the volunteers are. And again, so we have one person who actually is very instrumental in coordinating all the volunteers on that day and prior to, just making sure they know who it is that they need to talk to or find on the day to get into their area of responsibility. Telling them where to park, just basically giving them a lot of details so they understand, what time they need to be there, and then what's going on at the event. So we have all the details. So we go on and on. We give them all this information. They can access it by email. We definitely, thank them a lot. We give them a lot of appreciation. So yeah, it really has become something that we've, worked on over time, and we've again, try to make sure that they feel like they're part of something. So, trying to think about why would someone volunteer at our event? I mean, you know, we know that in some cases, people want to belong to a certain community. So we try to create that community feel by involving them in the event. And, sometimes our events have some important merits. Like one of our events last year helped one of the Barbadian triathletes get to the Olympics. So, that's something people want to be a part of. Like that is something people can, they want to see that happen and say that they were a part of it. They were there when they saw, Matthew finish on the podium and cement his spot at the Olympics, right? So there's a feel-good story there that comes along with volunteering. Um, some of them need hours. They're part of volunteer programs, whether it's through school or whatever. So, those are other areas where we can tap into volunteers, normally students. That are looking for volunteer hours. So that's an area that people would choose to volunteer, or why. Some people want it on their CV, so they just are looking for volunteer hours because they want to, show that they're involved in their community and putting in extra work outside of, their day-to-day activities. Some people appreciate the sport and just want to be part of it. So there's a lot of reasons why, people volunteer, and when we can identify those areas, it makes it easier for us to kind of reach out to those people and get a high response level in terms of why they would choose to come to our events. So that is part of the story. Where do we get our volunteers? Like that's another challenge that we had to refine over time, is how do we find 80 people that want to do this at sometimes arriving 4:30 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday, right? So not the typical time when someone wants to volunteer. So, again, we have to give them that experience that they feel they're part of something. We appreciate them and the time that they've given. So yeah, we've obviously the easiest place to find these volunteers. You look within your own organization. So are there, stakeholders, people who are involved that you can draw on? Do they have family members, obviously, that are also able to be there and be involved? So we have our directors and kind of their network, the athletes and their support groups. So whether it be family, those tend to be a big bulk of our volunteers. Where we've needed to supplement that, UE has the Give Back program, which is, again, students at UE looking to put in volunteer hours. So They're quite a good source of volunteers. Yeah, so between all those groups, we tend to be able to get what we need. We've had the rare instance where we've had more than we need, which is a pleasant surprise to have more volunteers than you actually need. It's hard to say no because you always want to make sure that you have people coming. But one of the challenges is you don't want people showing up and not having a clear responsibility or feeling like they have something to do. Like having a volunteer show up and kind of twiddling their thumbs or not doing something or being assigned a role is not a good experience for them, and they're likely not going to come back because they're like, in our case, it'd be like I sat out in the sun for 4 hours and didn't do anything, like I didn't contribute. So, I think we have to think of volunteers as they're volunteering their time, they're not being paid, but they want to do something meaningful, and that sometimes means you have to put them to work. So, we try to make sure that all our volunteers are given those responsibilities and understand that they have an integral part in our event. Moving on to like some other kind of challenges that we face is, again, that early morning time, getting them there on time. So we have to make sure they know what time to arrive, who to find when they first get there, where they need to be at what time. The race starts at certain times. So some people need to be in positions. So communication is very key to kind of solving that problem in terms of, just empowering the volunteer to really do their job effectively. So we use communication. I mean, again, we try to make them comfortable by offering them a snack and water, and we make sure they are in touch with everybody in terms of once their role is done, their chief will let them know, okay, you're finished for the day, you can now just enjoy the event as a spectator. So we really do a lot to try to stay engaged with the volunteer kind of throughout the process. I mean, another challenge we face is, how do you coordinate the 80 people, right? On the day, it's like a bit of organized chaos, if you will. Like we really rely on our structure in terms of that hierarchy, and you have to let people kind of, you know, lead and understand what needs to get done and trust that they'll do it. I mean, yeah, we have kind of people there that are overseeing everything, but for the most part, we have to empower our chiefs to kind of get what they need done and make sure they have enough volunteers to do that. Um, Other things, it's how, in terms of understanding the positive experience, like really it's that recurring, or the volunteer that keeps coming back is so valuable because that dependency and knowing that when you make the call or you ask them, they're going to do it. And again, that comes back to the fact that they felt valued at the events. They've enjoyed their time volunteering. It didn't seem like a chore or hard work, and they really feel like there's part of a community. So I guess in terms of wrapping things up, like I just want to leave you with kind of one image in terms of that embodies our community. Like at the end of every event, we gather our volunteers, we take a photo on the beach, and I would say everyone in the picture looks like they're smiling, so they had a good time. But that's something that as our recurring volunteers become part of the community, they just know at the end of the event, we're going to take this group photo and celebrate the fact that we've just put on a great event and it's been very, very successful. So I think that really just kind of summarizes kind of our whole experience when it comes to volunteers.
Just want to bring a few things that Darren talked about to the forefront, because you might be watching this and going, well, I don't do events and I don't need 80 volunteers. But I think there's some themes to what Darren talked about that are pertinent to any volunteer conundrum. And that is being organized. We're going to keep emphasizing to be clear, what is it that you want? Because if the clearer you can be, the more people will self-select and say, I can do that. And so Darren really outlined, be organized in what you're asking for and be clear on what you're asking for. Community is another thing we're going to talk about today. And you saw the spreadsheet of all the things that need to happen. One person cannot do that. And so in BFIT's case, they created a hierarchical structure in order to deal with that. And yet your organization might only need 5 volunteers, but one person won't be able to organize them all. And so it's thinking about how can this work internally so that we can respond to the volunteers. Because Darren mentioned, you want them to have a good experience. You want them to feel like they're adding value. And what is that outcome? Like Darren really articulated well that it's a very visual outcome. Someone sitting on standing on a podium getting a medal is very visual, and people want to be part of that. They want to be part of that excitement. And in your organizations, your causes are probably those things that get people excited. So was there any questions that people wanted to ask Darren or bring up right now in relation to what Darren was talking about?
I
Okay.
had a question.
Yeah, go Mel.
Thank you, Darren. That was really very impressive. I mean, I've been to a couple of the events actually, and I just didn't realize the extent of the planning that goes into it. Did you have a professional event planner volunteer to help map this out at any point?
No, and it's something we've always kind of thought that would lend itself to a very smooth event. I mean, again, we kind of through trial and error and through experience kind of figured this out, but an event planner or someone with kind of project management type of experience would be a natural fit for this type of thing. So that's something we've talked about kind of at the kind of board level is, you know, do we want to recruit somebody that has that clear skill to kind of act as the race chair and kind of take that on? So, you know, those are things that we always have to be open to in terms of, you know, again, that would again lead itself to probably a smoother running event. It'd be a lot less stress for obviously the volunteers or the directors that are doing it. So I guess the answer is no. We've never directly used the services, but we've definitely recognized that that would be a very valuable addition to our team of kind of event volunteers.
I have another question. Sorry. I
Go
just
for it.
jotted these down as you were speaking. Do you have any international volunteers? Like, do any volunteers travel to come and be a part of this event?
I mean, we have in terms of, I guess, because our races are, we do try to market our races to outside or overseas participants. So we tend to draw sometimes Canadians, Americans, people from the UK, other islands. You know, they tend to bring their support people or families with them. You know, there will be the occasional time where, yeah, those people who are not racing will say, "Oh, can we help out? Can we, you know, do something?" So we haven't actively recruited them, but indirectly, you know, there are those people that are accompanying the athletes and you know are willing to kind of you know get involved at the kind of event level. And again, you know, Barbados, there's probably at any given time, you know, a fair number of overseas people here. And I think if they knew there was a triathlon event going on, you know, we probably could recruit some of them as well. I mean, so that would be another area of potential sourcing of volunteers is finding kind of those groups of people that are here visiting or, you know, and again, they might be actually just triathletes that are here on holiday and just say, oh, wow, this is great. There's an event going on. I should, you know, go down and check it out and maybe help out. So yeah, that would be a very good source of new recruits.
Cool. I'll talk about that later.
Okay, Darren, thank you. This gets the juices flowing, and like Malu said, she's going to touch upon some of these things in the latter part of the session. So again, it doesn't matter if you run events, it doesn't matter if you need 80 people. Some of the things that Darren talked about are kind of the foundational pieces that if you have in place, you're going to get the right volunteer and going to get people to come back. Because what BFIT has been successful at is getting returning volunteers, and that with such big numbers is kind of a big deal. So thank you, Darren.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So some of the things we learned from BFIT, the challenge is organizing a large group of people to help run recurring events. And so what they do is they engage volunteers before, during, and after the event. So before, you saw coordination is key, organization, so they know who they need and those people know what they're doing. During the event, they make the volunteers feel like they're appreciated and they're part of something bigger. And then afterwards, Darren was telling me before that they stay in touch because they want those people to return. Volunteers that have been through the experience are going to know what to do when they come back. And that is advantageous when you're looking for a lot of volunteers. So now we're going to move on to our second guest speaker. And let me just introduce Bajans Helping Bajans. So Laura Smith started Bajans Helping Bajans during the pandemic. And it's a grassroots community initiative. And so we're going to hear how Bajans Helping Bajans wants to serve as many people on the island as they can without having to scale up into a large organization. And so what this means is they've expanded through partnerships, and Laura can tell us a bit more about this. And there's as I mentioned, a community focus to make this happen. Okay, Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit more about Bajans Helping Bajans and your experience, and then I'll come back on and we'll have a chat.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you to the Barbados Third Sector and the Peter and Jan Booth Foundation for inviting Bajans and Helping Bajans to participate in this. Malu is also part of our group. She's more recently joined us, I think last year, but she's very informative and very hardworking. So it's good to be here. So Bajans Helping Bajans is a grassroots group. It started during COVID, literally in my living room. It was really a food drive to help single mothers initially, because when obviously there was a COVID shutdown, there was no income coming into households. There was also no way for people to get food. If you remember, you used to have to go line up and get a $50 hamper from Popular, etc. So I collected funds from family and friends, and I'd go line up at Popular and get the $50 hampers. And originally working through the National Organization of Women, I would distribute them. And then it got to be obviously a greater demand as the COVID crisis continued. So moving on from family and friends, what we did is we got friends of friends to get involved. And eventually it got so large that we couldn't actually just do it ourselves and pack stuff ourselves. So we, a community supermarket in my community in St. George called the Bridge Supermarket, which is a very community-minded family run called the Trotmans. I was talking to them about what we were doing, and they said, we would be happy to help. So if people obviously donated funds to the Bridge Supermarket, they would keep track of it, and then they would pack the hampers for us. Their staff would actually take the time to pack the hampers once a week. We would just pick up these pre-packed $50 or $80 hampers and distribute them throughout the country. And at one point, we were probably distributing 1,000 hampers because the COVID crisis, obviously in 2020-21 hit us really hard. And there were, as I said, we were initially with single women, single mothers. But I mean, we actually even reached, there were students that were stranded at the, I think it's called the American University, which is an offshore medical school. There were some kids from Bangladesh, Africa, and India stranded there that couldn't get back to their homelands. They had no food, so we actually helped them. There were actually a lot of men working in construction from Haiti and Nigeria, etc., that were living in houses, group houses. We actually helped them. So it expanded into a lot more than just single mother families. But going back to what the initial concept was, it really was a small group of getting family and friends together. And then it grew on to friends of friends. And then what really helped us was going on to social media. So I just set up a Facebook page called Bajans Helping Bajans. And pretty much lots of people then wanted to volunteer and provide a hamper. So we encourage people to do their own hamper and take it to a family directly, as opposed to just donating money to the Bridge Supermarket. We never took money because we're not a registered charity. Sometimes we would take, from people we know, we would take supermarket vouchers and use supermarket vouchers to distribute, which sometimes were required. It was easier than distributing hampers of food. But for the most part, it really was trying to get Bajans or people living in Barbados to help other Bajans or other people living in Barbados. So it really was not for us to provide everything. It was to say, put a post out that, this person needs help, and somebody else would say, you know what, I can offer clothes in size 8 for a child and a size 4 shoe, and that they would either deliver them to us to deliver, or they would deliver those items themselves to the family, which is obviously much better for us, and it helped people get more involved in the community. Of course, not everybody had a great experience, because sometimes when you get people into the community and delivering items themselves, then they start getting harassed by neighbors and ask for more and more things. Like, I start out with shoes and then they want a fridge. And so a lot of people backed out of doing their own deliveries eventually and put us back in. And there are a few of us that are pretty hardened, we know what we do when we go into the communities. and do what we do. But a lot of the volunteers did, as I say, come from family and friends and just from associates. And I'd say most of them. Malu, how did you get involved? Was it through the page, or, I mean, it was through friends, right?
It was through the Facebook page because there was a specific case that I didn't really know what to do, and I reached out to you, and then
Yeah. And that's how, as I say, the social media really did help us. So that's social media presence is really important. And another question, just going back to what Darren and Shari was saying about how it was important to kind of focus people. There is a case that we have right now. Malu would know about it. There's a little boy, a terminal cancer that we're dealing with, and it's a new case. I've only just got introduced to this last week. We got him back into hospital, but they discharged him a couple of days ago. And extreme poverty. He's terminal. And a lot of people, I put a post up, and a lot of people want to help, but it's like, how do you direct people to help? Because we haven't even figured out how to help. Well, I think we finally figured out what we want to do today, but it's really knowing what direction to ask people help for. So we even had 2 major charities come and say, look, we'll help, but we weren't sure. I mean, the dilapidation of the house is incredible. The pain of the child is incredible. So do we want to get a carer? But a carer is not going to go into that residence. I mean, it's horrific. There's no floor. So we can't get a carer to go. Do we move the child out and away from the father? So there's lots of moving parts. Sometimes we need to step back and figure out what it is that we need to guide people to do. And that's just an example of, I could say that a lot of people want to help, but we were not sure exactly how to guide people specifically in with that case until perhaps today. So I guess, there are a lot of people that want to help in Barbados, but they need direction. They don't know how to help, And so if you can advertise for help and tell people specifically how you need help. I need, people to transport food from the Bridge supermarket to the West Coast, for example, or to the East Coast. Would you be willing to do 5 deliveries? Then I think it's a lot more efficient than just saying you need help and just not knowing where that help needs to be directed.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So there's some more themes that are coming up here. You mentioned clarity because people want to help, right? And Barbados, I think, I'm originally from Canada, but I think Barbados is very unique in that it is already a community environment. And so Bajans Helping Bajans has leveraged the community to make things happen rather than taking it all on your own. And I think that's one of the big things, right, Laura?
Correct. Yeah. So it is a true community drive. As I said, we're not providing the funds, say like certain foundations or trusts. We're just leveraging other people to help other people. And that's what the beauty is. We post this, this is the requirements for this household. This person needs a fridge. That person needs that. And we do different posts. And I take those posts I remove as soon as we get the things. I don't leave them up, So you might not go on the page and say, well, I don't see anybody requesting much. But, once obviously I know people have got their fridge, I take that off. Or if they've got those size 4 shoes, take that off. But yeah, it definitely is very community oriented. It's bringing community together.
And the other thing that kind of resonated with me and what I've heard about the third sector in Barbados is there's a lot of grassroots organizations. And so you don't have to be an organization with mass to extend your reach, but you can't do it all on your own. And Laura, I think that example of the child that, was sent home from the hospital is such a great example of, okay, there's a need and we haven't even entirely figured it out yet, but we're going to reach out to others who can help us figure it out. And I think that's one of the learnings when it comes to volunteerism, that sometimes if you're not in that space, you don't exactly know what you need, but there will be others that can help you figure that out.
Yeah, and I mean, we're very close with a lot of other charities. I mean, the Barbados Community Foundation is one that actually gives us our back to school supplies because we do a big back to school drive. We have Xander Venezia Trust gives us a lot of the baby supplies, baby formula, Pediasure, the diapers, and so etc. We reach out. We have OBGYNs, gynecologists that help us do the seminars. Malu helped us put on a lovely seminar. I think I mentioned to you at the Olympus to deal with healthy relationships and family planning. We have contacts in the police force. We had an unfortunate instance of a little girl being gang raped by 10 men. So at least we knew where to go, how to deal with that. If there are child abuse cases, or domestic abuse cases, we have parties that we can send, groups that we know deal with advocates that deal with things like that we can reach out to. So it's again trying to harness the professional dynamics across the island of who does what. So we're really not able to do counseling, although we have Rashima, who is a child psychologist. We have Rachel on board, who was a pediatric nurse from England. So so we actually have some good volunteers, but they're not all licensed to work here. So we then they can give us an assessment and say, well, I think this needs to go to childcare board, or this needs to go to this department, etc. And then we can reach out to different facilitators who do different things.
So some of the situations you're finding yourself in are very complex. And so to think that you would be able to handle that internally in a grassroots organization is not realistic, right? But drawing upon the community, the skills are out there. And I think this is one of the messages we want to keep giving about volunteerism. The skills are out there, and the people that want to be part of it are out there. It's just a matter of being clear about what your need is and finding an avenue to get that word out.
Yeah, and they're online, for example, a lot of online counseling sites. The Barbados Professional Women have one, our Barbados government has one, and a lot of people don't. Verdun has one. A lot of people don't know where to go to just have some help, who are at the verge of suicide or, really down. But they are. So we actually do just have, we can say, look, why don't you try one of these organizations for a phone call? When people just message us, because they don't really call us, they'll send us messages and say, that I'm my, ultimate, I can't go on. And we just share the information, and we do know that people have, followed up with the different leads we've given them. And yeah, I mean, we have unfortunately lost some people along the way to suicide, but yeah, but which is not easy. But yeah.
But this is another message that kept coming up at the collaborative: to collaborate. Find out who's in the space. Anything you can't handle, send to an organization that can not only handle it, but can also, that's their mission. So It sounds like Bajans Helping Bajans has done very well at creating a network and a community to allow you to do that. Thank you, Laura. That was such a great success story. Bajans Helping Bajans, and something that you started yourself, and then, like you said, it went friends and then friends of friends and grew from there. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Again, Bajans Helping Bajans, the challenge was they want to serve as many people as possible, and yet they don't want the infrastructure to become this larger organization. So they do it through community and partnerships. And we saw how, again, through Bridge Market, got volunteers from another organization to help out. Facebook, they're very clear about what they need, and then people see it and go, I can help, I have that, I can do this for them. And then the last point I want to make on the slide is, if you have a blueprint for what you're looking for, you might not have all the pieces, but as long as it's mapped out what you're wanting to do, like some of the events that Bajans Helping Bajans has put on, then the expertise can be found through your network and your community. All right. So again, we want to emphasize that when you're going out to figure out what volunteers you need, figure out what the ask is. And here's some areas to really think about. First of all, what is the identity of your organization? And at the end of this session, we'll put the registration link for our next session, which is to identify and articulate your value proposition. If you can get others excited about what you do, they will come out of the woodwork wanting to be part of that. And Darren talked about that. What's the outcome? What are we trying to create here? Identify your organization stage. So are you just starting up and you need people who understand that space? Or are you a well-oiled machine and you know exactly what you want to volunteer to do and you just have to articulate that? And then the biggest point we want to make is articulate the volunteer's role. And because Aaron and I are accountants, we did this as a kind of an accounting case study because a lot of people need accounting help and they sometimes come to us and we're like, oh, we're not really your accountant. And, you know, it's kind of a broad field. So if we take this as a case study, first is, can one person do it? Or are you looking for something that, let's say, a firm needs to do or a group of expertise needs? Determine if the ask is technical. Is it something very specific and specialized, or is it something that can be routinely done? And if you can envision what you want the volunteer to do, is there a list of tasks you can put together? How clearly can you have a visualization of what the person will be doing? Now, this includes how often do they need to come in to see you? How many hours are you expecting? Like, what is the level of commitment that you want from this volunteer? And then if you're not really sure, are there professionals or experts in the field that you can ask? And this is kind of what Bajans Helping Bajans is doing. Sometimes there's a need and they can't quite articulate how they're going to fill that need, but there are others in their community that can help with that. So one of the messages is don't take it all on your own. If you're getting stumped and frustrated trying to figure out what the need is, ask others that can help you. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Malu.
Sure. Thank you, Sherry. Hi, everyone. I'll try to make this quick because I realize we're short on time, and we can have a bit of a discussion after this as well. But I'm here today to discuss Caribbean Collaborative, which, similar to Bajans Helping Bajans, is a grassroots organization that I founded when I moved back to the island. I came back about 10 years ago now and realized that there were quite a few community things happening. This is also a theme that I feel has come up quite a bit throughout this workshop, that there were a lot of things happening in silo. And so what I'm aiming to do with Caribbean Collaborative, which we have been doing for the past 10 years, is to kind of connect people with causes that they care about and vice versa. And so organizations have come to us and said, you know, I need help with this, with X, Y, and Z, and we help to break it down and to help simplify the process by outlining those volunteer roles. We sometimes manage those volunteer roles as well, and we basically let people know what's happening in the island. That's it in a nutshell. What's been really interesting, especially during the pandemic, is that we've had this influx of different groups of people to the island who are also really keen on giving back. So we have people from the Welcome Stamp, the different digital nomads who've moved to the island since 2020, with just an incredible skill set as well. A lot of people who have come from more developed countries where volunteerism is part of the culture. It's very heavily promoted. And so often you find that you don't really need to convince those people to volunteer. They want to volunteer. They just need to know where they're needed and where they can get involved. Often what the case may be is that people also only see those organizations or opportunities that are the loudest on social media or that they might read about in the newspaper. And as we know, we have so many organizations and even individuals who are doing great work that may not even be known or are not even telling their story. And again, that's where we kind of come in to try and help fill that gap. I'm lucky to be involved in quite a number of different organizations, and through groups like Bajans Helping Bajans, I'm learning about even more on a day-to-day basis. And so because of that knowledge, I'm able to then connect the dots and to try to connect people where it's most effective and where they can be of the most use really as a volunteer. So what we mainly do as well, which was mentioned on the other slide, sorry, was that I realized that I had to kind of take cast a wide net when it came to actually reaching different groups of people. And so we have a volunteer newsletter that I send out once a month with a list of volunteer opportunities. In that newsletter, I go through some of the details that Sherry mentioned earlier, where organizations come to me and say, like I mentioned earlier, that, you know, we need a volunteer to help us with marketing. Now, marketing is such a broad scope of different things that we then break it down a little bit and say, well, okay, where is it that you're hoping to start? Where do you want to start? So is it with social media? So let's start with a social media volunteer and have a student, have an individual who may be an expert in that area come on board, and it might be a project basis or it might be a long-term relationship that they want to build with that organization or with that cause. And they can then apply those skills to help that organization. I mean, that's one very basic example. We've gone more in depth with much more rigorous things like accounting, auditing, things like that as well. And so what I do is then I will list the information in the newsletter with as much detail as possible. And then those who have signed up to the newsletter, we have close to, I would say, just over 400 people on our newsletter database right now, and always looking to grow that. And those people then usually get in touch with the individuals or organizations directly through the newsletter, through social media, through workshops such as this. And you know, trying to let as many people as possible know that we exist and we're here to help. This is something I do voluntarily as well. So this is my give back to the NGO space in Barbados. So when it comes to finding volunteers, Darren touched on this a bit in his talk, where, you know, reaching out to starting with your volunteer base. So people, you know, personally, of course, through different service groups. I don't think people are aware of how many service groups we have in Barbados and how willing and keen they are to get involved in different projects. We also have very active church groups, of course, and often youth groups as well, who are always keen to get involved and to have those volunteer hours. So he mentioned the Give Back program. That's one excellent network. We have, I think it's 6 universities on island, and many of those students are looking for Give Back hours as well, whether it be medical, whether it be something physical, an event, or a virtual volunteer role. And something that I like to talk about quite a bit as well is to also look outside of Barbados, whether it's regionally or internationally, to find organizations that are aligned with your cause. So cause coalitions are a really powerful way to get volunteers involved. So if you have an organization that may be part of an international network that you're a part of, you can reach out to them and say, hey, we really need help with X, Y, and Z. Do you have someone within your network who might be willing to get on board? And you'll find that often there are people looking for things to do. And again, with the virtual aspect of all this, you can go beyond the borders of Barbados, of course. Something that I didn't mention was the United Nations Volunteers, which is quite a rigorous but also extremely detailed volunteer program that not many organizations in Barbados utilize, where you have volunteers from all over the world who are keen to get involved in projects. Of course, corporate volunteer programs, corporate social engagement programs are not really very developed in many businesses in Barbados, but that's not to say that if you approach a company with a corporate social engagement program, that they wouldn't be willing to get involved. Now, that's not the same as asking them for a donation, of course. We're talking about actually getting their workforce involved. We've seen examples of that with, for example, accounting companies, law firms, some of the more obvious examples that come to mind. But then you have many others as well, graphics, social media companies, marketing companies, that would be willing to give back as well. I mean, I'm a marketer by trade, by profession. So I think in general, for example, when it comes to social media, we often think of Facebook and Instagram. TikTok, I'm a bit too old for TikTok as a millennial, but TikTok, of course, is a really great platform for engaging younger people. And LinkedIn, I mean, Bajans are really active on LinkedIn. And I think the Caribbean in general, people are very active on LinkedIn. And so don't overlook that as a really powerful tool that can be utilized to engage with potential volunteers. You can actually put like job descriptions on LinkedIn as well and put it as a volunteer role.
Here's our closing thoughts to takeaways. So first of all, act now. Be clear about what you need. Go out and find it. Be specific. This word specific, we're going to use over and over again. The more specific you can be, the better people will self-identify and fill that need. Expand your reach. Malu gave a lot of great examples about how to go beyond what we traditionally would think for the volunteer pool. Invest in relationships. We heard from both our guest speakers about how they invest not only in their volunteers, but in their network. So people keep coming back and they can fill those needs. And the last point is lead the culture shift. This is something that we want to create, volunteerism as a part of the Bajan culture. And it starts with our organizations and moves outward.